So we are back. Quickly, we just made sure Anzet's comfortable. I think she's with us in the background. But now we're going to hear about somebody who we can change people's thoughts process. How do we actually make that mind shift change? Yes. And this will lead us into closing up day one, packaging it, putting a little bow on it and saying, right, this is where we are, this is what we've got, this is how we change people's perspectives. And then we move into day two about what does the future hold. So Anzet, are you with us?
I'm here. How's it going?
Hello. How nice to see you again, love.
Lovely to see both of you. See,
yes, indeed, 100%. So we're going to get out the way. We're going to let you introduce yourself. You're the Director of Proof Communications, and your title is Convince Us You Can. So I think Devon and I are both really interested. You know, you're going to close off day one for us. Yeah. So convince us. Anzet, let's take it away from your side.
Sure. So we've heard a lot today already about the state of the electric vehicle industry in South Africa. All the elements from infrastructure and charging to financing and ride hailing. But no conversation about electric cars can be complete without staring the elephant in the room right in the eye and saying, listen, dude, why aren't you leaving an electric car? So what I want to talk about is the communication element of electric mobility, is how do we get people into electric cars? And what is the human element to taking people from what they're used to something new? Now, the benefits of electric cars are obviously undeniable. On one hand are the improvements that mass adoption of EVs would present for the environment, a reduction in carbon emissions and a massive impact on the resource extraction industry. And then there's the cost of ownership, the efficiency of electric energy versus combustion energy, with the losses in the combustion process making electric cars seem like an absolutely obvious choice. But what is it that stops someone from buying an electric car? Is it range anxiety? Is it a lack of infrastructure or affordability? Is it the lack of variety, the number of cars you can choose from on the South African market? Is it a lack of understanding or education? The short answer is yes, but there's so much more to how we experience new things than just tech, knowledge, and money. To figure out what's missing, I actually want to look at a few times in history we've managed to cause a massive shift in culture, and maybe also where we failed. What can we learn from other major shifts in our time? We can look to music, for example, which in my lifetime alone has shifted from tapes that you wound up with a big pen to CDs that you stored in your car's visor, to many cars no longer having a CD player, but relying solely on USB and audio jacks, and of course, the unending resilience of radio waves. Here we see a technological shift, which not only tapped into the market of young, early adopters eager to try out the latest tech, but also the benefits of more music on a CD than a tape, more music on your phone than could ever fit on even an MP3. But it also relied heavily on forced change. Car manufacturers, driven by the tech industry, quickly adapted their product, giving those amongst us who miss the sound of Roxette on a tape band little choice in adapting. The music industry adapted by listing artists on streaming services like Spotify and Apple Play, but the way we experience music wasn't the initial change. We still got in our cars, stuck one thing into another thing, and headbanged our way through traffic. And you can see a similarity to this in the adoption of EVs in Europe, and Norway has been mentioned a lot today. Setting targets for electric vehicle influx to the market makes it harder and harder for customers to choose anything else. Paying congestion tax versus benefiting from tax breaks also plays a major role. And of course, the more EVs on the road, the more infrastructure those countries will develop. And whether the chicken or the egg comes first doesn't matter, because the one is almost certainly going to lead to the other. But what about markets like South Africa, where we see slow legislative progress, with electric vehicles still garnering a tax instead of giving a tax break? A charging infrastructure now starting to develop slowly, and local startups facing massive hurdles to get to the market. With manufacturers like Nissan, BMW, and Jaguar already here with EVs, and the likes of Audi, Volkswagen, Kia, and more joining soon, how can that market be driven if not through forced change? An industry that may provide a hint as to how to market directly is a little counterintuitively electronic cigarettes, specifically vaping, those electronic cigarettes that have suddenly popped up in every mall and shopping center with deceptively delicious flavors and setups akin to ice cream stores that I, as a non-smoker, have often walked into with the wrong impression. Vaping feels like it came out of nowhere in the last 10 years. But really, e-cigarettes, much like electric vehicles, aren't even remotely new. De Villiers Botha was just talking a little earlier about his dad remembering using ox wagons in the 1930s. As little as 3 years before that, when our grandparents nearing 90 would have been born, the idea of an electric cigarette was described in a patent in the US, followed by a second patent 40 years later. In the 70s and 80s, we see a prototype in the US that fails to get traction, but introduces the word vape to the public. And then a turning point comes in the early 2000s. So when I was starting high school, Chinese pharmacist Han Lik creates the Ruyan, very importantly translated as like a cigarette. The Ruyan is followed by cigalikes, electronic devices that look and act like cigarettes. And while they fail to flood the market globally because of unreliability and technical issues, they act as a spark, no pun intended, for an industry about to boom. The first boom comes in the early 2010s, when along with the FIFA World Cup in South Africa, the quality of products improves significantly. The global uptake of vaping jumps from 7 million to 25 million users in just 3 years. And then, when Public Health England releases a limited study that vaping is 95% safer than smoking, we see mass uptake, despite many governments urging that there's no evidence that vaping is safe long-term. So here we have a product taken up en masse, despite buyers being dissuaded by some people from using them. So what does vaping have to do with electric cars, right? In both industries, we're talking about replacing an existing ritual, very important word today. We're replacing an existing ritual, and in both cases, the old ritual is already facing negative connotations. The risk of comparing the impact of lung cancer to the impact of climate change, two very different things. Both these products face a wave of scrutiny, and they're increasingly framed as old tech, and their replacements being marketed as something out of the future, a phrase we've already heard today. So what did vaping do differently? Firstly, buying an electronic cigarette isn't the major economic decision that buying a car is. Let's set that aside. But very importantly, vaping was positioned to replace an existing ritual in a way that mimicked that ritual. E-cigarettes blow smoke, and many of them look like normal cigarettes. And yes, they offered more choice in terms of flavor. They moved the point of sale predominantly from petrol stations and grocery stores to snazzy standalone stores and shops, elevating the cool factor of smoking. But the parts of smoking that were embedded in our culture, standing outside with a slender cigarette between your fingers, blowing smoke rings, and all that all-important nicotine buzz, those were all retained. Our instinct may be to improve the uptake of electric vehicles by doing more research, more education about range anxiety, about the safety of batteries, about long-term ownership. And that's not necessarily wrong, but that's all information. Where vaping found fertile ground was not in research about health and safety or functionality or longevity, but in the story of smoking. When replacing an existing ritual, e-cigarettes mimic the parts of the habit that had become iconic: the smoke, the image, the repetitive behavior, the social nature of the act. And while it was bolstered by market availability and variety, a lack of legislations, and of course the addictive factor of nicotine, keeping the ritual has been central to the success of electronic cigarettes. How do we extend that ritual to electric vehicles? When you think about car ownership, fuel is deeply embedded in our experience. From the smell of your parents' car to the act of grabbing a pint Coke at a fuel station, the fuel itself cannot be divorced from how we engage with our cars and not replaced with anything. Fuel is also easy to understand. There's a gauge with an E and an F, and so long as you don't fall for the joke that E stands for enough, you know when to head over to Shell or BP to fill up. You recognize the yellow Shell and the green BP and the blue engine and the bubbles of Sasol. And the legacy of fuel cannot be underestimated. As South Africans, we associate fuel with fuel stations, with a safe haven next to the road, with Amma Gluk Gluk in Ach Seker Nie Ver Nie, a quick garage pie and a Coke, and the unique experience and appreciation that South Africans have for petrol attendants. So while we do have to consider range anxiety and infrastructure and affordability and a variety of choices, we also need to consider the rituals we're asking South Africans to change when we market electric cars. Gerald Chapman from Eskom said earlier this morning, our entire model is built around the combustion engine. And that doesn't just extend to how we manufacture cars. When my electric car breaks down, am I still going to be able to take it to my local mechanic, who my family has used for decades and the only person I trust? When I need more juice, can I get it anywhere from a variety of brands that I recognize while I grab a pie and a Coke or a quick coffee? Are my kids going to have the same experience of road trips as I did with my family growing up? The vibration of the engine, the pit stops for ice cream, the long drives playing I Spy. And that's without considering the segment of South Africans who drive cars for pleasure. We've been weaning our drivers off V8 engines for some time, and this is an extreme extension of that, because the roar of the engine, the vibration of the wheel, the warmth of a bonnet, these are all embedded in petrol heads, and the EV market has largely asked us to give up that all and not necessarily given us a clear picture of what we're replacing it with. And here, of course, it's impossible not to talk about Elon Musk and Tesla, because influence matters. And the image portrayed by the brand that has managed to make electric cars sexy is important. That maverick, devil-may-care approach that Musk takes not only to public appearances, but also to his business, is closer to what petrol heads enjoy about cars than anything any other car brand has put out. Rivian has followed a similar marketing strategy, and we now see echoes among other luxury brands. In the US, when consumers were asked which brand of electric vehicle they would buy over a Tesla from a list of manufacturers who had not yet released their models, luxury brands came out on top. Audi, Volvo, Lexus, Porsche were chosen over Tesla, whereas Tesla beat out brands like Infiniti and Lincoln and Acura. We also cannot shy away from the fact that until recently, the portion of the population that thought that being green was cool was very small. And EVs have been inextricably linked to the green movement, which itself has an enormous PR challenge created by fatigue and over-information and the scale of the problem of climate change. And with the popularization of the climate change movement, even just in the last 5 years, as well as the global legislative response, this is becoming less of a problem. But car manufacturers cannot ignore that to many South Africans, the idea of buying a car for the good of the planet is not a convincing argument. And in creating a picture for South Africans about what EV ownership could look like within their families, their lived experience, you also need to look how the picture is forming in the support networks. So when you go to your dealership, what options are available in your price range? And what is that determined by? I spoke to the director of South Africa's National Automobile Dealers Association, Gary McCraw, who summarized the conversations that dealers in the country are having as a fork in the road. Either we'll see massive investment in upgrading fuel refineries so that we can keep getting internal combustion engines from the EU, or we'll leapfrog the fuel problem to adopt electric vehicles. But very importantly, either way, there's no clear roadmap. There's no clear story being told by dealerships among themselves that they can use to start preparing for change, because there is no clarity. And so the second most important word to ritual today is clarity. Similarly, in speaking to the Retail Motoring Industry Organization, South Africa's largest collection of motoring associations, the conversations focused on the lack of clarity for the service industry. Mechanics don't know how much change they need to prepare for. Yes, they see the information, the charging stations being built, the models being imported, but they don't have a roadmap of what their lives will be like, by when, how much will change. So uncertainty abounds, and where uncertainty takes hold, change falters. The dealerships and service industry's perception of electric vehicles is as important as that of the consumers, because they reinforce the story, the picture, that EV ownership can replace South Africans' rituals. So how do we speak to buyers? Currently, electric cars are marketed largely on information about range, about affordability, about choice and the cost of ownership, information about climate change and emissions, about carbon dioxide and batteries. And this information is important, but people don't only make choices based on information. We need stories. We need to see ourselves in an electric car, taking our kids for their first drive. What is that experience like in an electric vehicle? What rituals can we retain? Which do we need to abandon? And importantly, what do we replace them with? When we're on road trips with our families, what do we do while the car charges? Can we stretch a pie and a Coke to a wimpy breakfast for stops that don't have fast chargers? Do some work, as de Villiers Botha suggested earlier today? With many charging stations not built at existing fuel stations, should we be trying to convince drivers to abandon the ritual of the fuel station when so much of our experiences of the road is tied to them? And if that is how we're doing it, what do we replace those rituals with? And finally, how do we give South Africans clarity? How do we give the service industry, from dealerships to your mechanic, of which my mom is one, a clear roadmap to what percentage of their customers will need to fix EVs? How many techies do they need to upskill? How often do EVs need to be serviced? What picture can we give the second-hand car market, which will significantly change when batteries either hold the car's value at a high price point or require a high upfront cost if they need to be replaced? What connection can we create to the branding of charging infrastructure? And what's the roadmap for fuel stations and all of their staff? And of course, for the everyday car buyer, when will I be able to choose from more than just the luxury brands? And what will my life, my rituals, my road trip, my relationship with my car look like when I own an electric vehicle?
You've given us a lot of food for thought. So let's talk about a little bit while we have a little 5-minute break. How do we go about changing those rituals? I mean, how do we go about changing people's mindsets? Because I think for most South Africans, if you said to them, you need to drive an EV, it's good for the planet, they would say, okay, but being able to afford to buy one is good for my bank balance. Where do we start having this mindset change and mind shift, and how do we start changing? Yes, the luxury vehicles, but how do we start having this mind shift where, De Villiers spoke about it, and I think every speaker has touched on it, that we need to start changing the way we perceive things. How are we going to go about that in South Africa, where traditionally long road trips are a part of our culture? Most people will tell you about stories from driving from Joburg to Durban or Cape Town. How do we start to adapt that mindset and change that mindset to be in line with EVs and the EV culture that we're going to have to adopt?
So taking a slight step back, communication is really about empathy, right? When you understand who you're speaking to, your communication is so much more effective. And a lot of people start communicating from the standpoint of, what do I want to say? And not, what is the perspective of the person I'm talking to? A lot of research has been done asking people what it would take for them to own an electric vehicle. But the way we ask those questions are biased to the answers that we want to find. For example, range anxiety and the cost of ownership and the cost of purchase and that kind of thing. But if we can understand how South Africans live with a vehicle, if we can look into the behavioral elements of car ownership and what they mean to South Africans, and how we engage with petrol attendants, and how we plan our road trips, and what handing a car down, teaching your child to drive means, how much of the fuel industry is connected with that, and how much do we need to create new rituals from an electric vehicle standpoint, then we can start to map out, just as a starting point, where do we need to find new rituals that are more for consumers looking to buy an EV, right? And this is when we've solved all of the other problems. It's still going to be difficult to get people to change a central part of their lives. So that's the first thing. And then I think the second most important thing is clarity. But we think clarity means information. We think clarity means, this is the range of your car, this is the cost of ownership. Clarity also means, are my mechanics going to be okay? Are my fuel stations going to be okay? What is South Africa's roadmap to having more electric vehicles on the market? And what does that mean for all the touch points that I, as a car owner, have with the industry, right? When I drive my car to the mechanic, is it going to be the same guy, or do I have to change everything from where I get my fuel to who services my car, to what road I take? Because that's a lot of change for someone to deal with when they don't have it clearly mapped out.
So how do we go about, and how does, there's obviously so many new players coming into the space at the moment. You've referenced Elon Musk and Tesla and Rimac and Rivian and all these companies that are coming out. How do the traditional OEMs, which I know we've got many of them in attendance, how do they start to change their communication to start talking in a different way that allows them to talk to people who are now talking about EVs? I mean, because we've obviously seen in South Africa, it's really only Jaguar and BMW who are in the space at the moment. Yeah. But from a communication point of view, Anzet, where do you think the traditional OEMs maybe need to change the way they communicate in a specifically South African context? I mean, I know we can talk about the Netherlands and how the iPace is doing so well there and the UK, but let's talk about South Africa. How do we make EVs more appealing for South Africans?
So I think you have to start by seeing it as an entire system, which a lot of the conversations today have been about, right? So if you're an OEM, if you're a large manufacturer selling a vehicle, your instinct is to sell the vehicle, right? And with it, you can sell the lifestyle. That's fine, and that's always great marketing. You show somebody what it's like to be in this vehicle, what it's like to live in this vehicle. The thing is, they can't only get the message from you. They can't only get the message from the people trying to make money off of selling the vehicle. They need to also have that reinforced when they go down to their dealership by seeing that some of the dealerships' technicians are now being trained to work on electric vehicles, by seeing what would happen when they sold that vehicle a couple of years down the line back to the dealership. How would that value be retained, right? They need to look that long in the future. They need to hear from the mechanic when they go there that, oh, I'm doing an electric vehicle servicing course at the moment because we expect more electric vehicles to come into the market. And that's not happening. When you talk to people in the industries, when you talk to the media around the industries, and when you talk to the member associations around the industries, those conversations are very young. They're only really starting to happen now. But the people on the ground have so much uncertainty. So if you think of me as a South African who's considering owning an electric vehicle, what are my touch points with information, stories, marketing at the moment? I see adverts for electric vehicles, which at the moment are predominantly quite high price point electric vehicles, right? So I know that someone is selling them, potentially making money off of them, and that they're available. But I don't see it in any other of the facets of my life where car ownership is part of my ritual. I don't see anything at the fuel station because we don't have enough charging stations that it's in people's consciousness. I don't hear about it at the dealership. I don't see secondhand electric vehicles sitting, with a what do you call that, the shoe polish price on the windscreen. I don't hear my mechanic talking about it. So when you want to tell people that the electric vehicle industry is going to be robust, it's going to be everywhere, it's going to be supported, it's going to be great to own it, you can't only be talking to them from this perspective of the person the company who's going to be making the most money off of selling electric vehicles. It's not convincing to me as a potential buyer.
Oh, fantastic. Devon?
Spot on, Anzet. In my opinion, we have to create a new market. We love our cars, we love our bakkies, and until we have the product lines that talk to the current market, we have to do this work. We have to build the right lines, the right products. I'm not too sure when the first electric bakkie will come, but that's what we need to wait for. In your opinion, how do we go about this? We almost have an advertising, marketing, sales, branding job to do.
Yeah, I think you need to start looking broader than just and I know there are a bunch of really fantastic local startups who work on electric vehicles, from everything from actually manufacturing homegrown electric vehicles to the infrastructure, people like you, Devon, to other parts of like the battery tech and Uyilo and those guys. So there's a lot of that. But the electric, like you say, it's an entire market. Electric vehicle ownership is so much more than just the ownership of the car. It's everything built into that. So I know that we have, for example, EVIA, which is the Electric Vehicle Industry Association. Vehicles like those can be used to start talking to the service industry, the secondhand car selling industry, the dealership industry, because you're not just talking to consumers, right? You're talking to everybody in the country whose livelihood and whose rituals center around fuel-based cars, around internal combustion cars. So if you're looking for like a practical roadmap of what do we do, I think that the main thing as a first step is to widen our scope of who we're talking with and who we're speaking to. And then the second thing is, we have in South Africa, we have fantastic water and waste roadmaps, right? They were developed by the Department of Trade and Industry when it was the DTI, and they map out how will we distribute water, what infrastructure needs to be replaced, and whether or not they're followed is not the point I'm making. They were mapped out year by year, geographic area by geographic area by a team of people so that everyone in government involved in water distribution knew exactly what was happening. A similar waste map exists, and there's a green economy roadmap being developed now. We almost need an electric vehicle roadmap in South Africa, where dealerships, new car dealerships and second-hand dealerships, the servicing industry, the fuel station industry, including people who work at fuel stations, everyone involved in the motoring industry has clarity on what are our timelines, what are our goals, how is it going to affect all of our lives. When everyone is communicating to the consumer from the same playbook, that's when we'll start to see consumer goes, oh, I can see myself getting to my electric car, charging it in my house in the evenings, driving it down to a brand that I recognize, plugging it in, sitting and working for an hour before it's charged, all of that kind of thing. But we cannot paint a picture for a consumer when the only people who are having the conversation are the manufacturers.
Okay, so I think that's a great point, and I think you made a valid point there, Anzet. So let me give you a tough one. Okay, so me, Rob Walker, I develop a electric bucky. I'm gonna take on Ford Ranger. I'm gonna take on Toyota Hilux. It's not going to look as bad as a Tesla Cybertruck. It's going to look like something that most people actually want to drive. And I want to market it to the 40 plus South African male. Lifestyle, male, female, and I want to say to them, this is the bucky that you can take. You can go mountain biking, you can do this, you can drive. And I come to proof and I say, all right, Anzet, tell me how I'm going to sell, 200 of these units every month. I want proof to come up with a communication strategy. I want you to help me sell to the hardest market segment, the guys who grew up, learned to drive on ice, and I want to convert them to my electric bucky. Anzet, pitch me your idea.
So I don't think you're asking me the difficult question you think you are, Rob. I don't think that's the hardest market section. So I used to be a 4x4 motoring journalist for a magazine called Leisure Wheels, and my experience of the 4x4 driving market, the people who are what you're describing, 40 plus, own the vehicle for lifestyle purposes, not as a workhorse, typically have a fair amount of disposable income, are incredibly technologically savvy, right? They're very interested in the tech that's in the car. They're rigorous readers. When you're a writer in the 4x4 industry, and it doesn't necessarily mean things with a transfer case, right? It means off-road vehicles like buckies. You really have to know your stuff, because you will get emails from readers dissecting your stories. They know more about their car than you do. It's far more rigorous than, for example, the performance car industry, where people are interested in the soul of it. People who own off-road vehicles love the tech. They love knowing what's inside there. So that is not as hard a market as you might think it is, because these are people who love new technology, who want reliability and proof. So information works really well for that specific market. They want to know, is it going to last? How am I going to service it? What's the long-term cost of ownership? What happens when I want to sell it? And more importantly, can it get me down that muddy road to the fishing spot I love? Right? Which can all be hashed out. It can all be proven. It can all be given through to people. You develop it at the right price point. You do your research well, and you just go out to the market with a demonstration of what the vehicle can do. The difficult question is ordinary people who buy cars at 150 to 300,000 Rand a vehicle, right? Who are not interested in what powers their vehicle. They don't know anything about how an internal combustion engine works, and they do not care. All they want to know is, can I do everything that I'm used to doing, everything I've seen everybody else do, with no barrier to entry, no learning curve for something new, and just own this car at my price point, take it down to the fuel station, right? Charge it up. How's it going to fit into a lifestyle where I don't care whether or not my car is, what the kilowatt output is or that kind of thing. I just want an easy thing to drive to work every day that isn't going to let me down and that doesn't require me to learn a whole new frame of existence to own and to use. That is your difficult market, right? And to those customers, you need to be communicating from lots of different inputs. You need to have them see on many different places that owning an EV will be simple, right? It will be as simple as owning an internal combustion engine. So they see a charging station down at their local fuel station or somewhere on their route. They understand how long it will take and they can plan around it, the charging, I mean. They have a clear map in their head financially to owning and operating the vehicle. They hear from their bank that their bank specifically has special deals for financing electric vehicles, which is a thing that's been brought up many, many times in South Africa and has not been developed further. They see on long road trips, they see what you would do with your time if you were waiting for a charger that was not fast charging. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so the toughest market are those people.
Yeah. Now, surely, I mean, those people, I mean, I think we know who you're talking about. That's the bulk of the buying market. Surely a rational suggestion to them is the green argument that everyone talks about. That this is the right, that we cannot continue doing the way we're doing, otherwise our planet's going to go up in smoke, so to speak. Surely that is an argument that, regardless of your price point, where you're coming from, that is an argument that we all understand, that we all have to do more. We can't just live for the today, tomorrow, this year. Surely that's when the lower income car brands who are coming with the not the luxury brands, surely that's the communication aspect that they need to take, that this is, yes, you can't just pop down to the fuel station and fill up. Yes, you are going to have to change your lifestyle, whether you like it or not. Surely that's an argument that we need to be pushing to those kind of consumers.
So, Rob, I think you're an optimist, right? You would like to think that most people care. And it's not just caring. Climate change has a major public relations problem in that, to a lot of people, the climate change issue feels insurmountable. It feels like a problem that the ordinary person couldn't possibly help solve. Yes, we can have meat-free Mondays, we can recycle and all that, but when you have large oil companies, when you have mass air pollution from things like vehicles and airplanes, the perspective that a lot of people come to the climate change problem with is that this is too big to solve. This is much bigger than me. And it's a very similar argument to getting people to feel like their vote matters in elections, because you feel like such a tiny part of a very big decision, right? Climate change is 10 times bigger than voting for the national president. And we can't even convince everybody in the country to vote. So now you're saying, here's something that you can do to combat the issue of climate change. And it may feel obvious that people would jump on that, but you often have the psychological problem with very big problems that nobody wants to take a small step because they believe that the staircase is just too big and that small step is going to be a waste of time. So when you walk into a dealership, yes, 100%, part of the message should be the green message. Part of the message needs to be, here is what owning an electric vehicle means in the grander scheme of things. And you will definitely find more fertile ground for that message now than you would have 6 years ago, 100%, right? But it cannot be the only message, because when I am standing in that dealership, right, and here's a vehicle that isn't electric and here's a vehicle that is electric, the green conversation is a portion, a percentage of what's going into my decision making, right? I'm thinking about the practicality of ownership. I'm thinking about how much I know about what will happen to that vehicle down the line, about financial, fiscal responsibility, about the kind of loan that I can get, about the mechanic that I'm going to take it to, about how I'm going to use it, day to day versus how I'm going to use it on holidays. And people make decisions based on shorthand information, based on what they already know, right? Based on what they're comfortable with. And electric vehicles are such a departure from what people are comfortable with. You cannot just make one argument. You need to support the entire ecosystem of how we engage with cars with information about how electric vehicles can fit into them. So I'm not saying don't tell people that they're good for climate. I'm just saying we cannot possibly rely on that argument.
And Zed, I think it's really interesting. I mean, Devon and I have been chatting in the studio a little bit, and I think it's for me it's a case of we need to learn to not preach to the converted, because the converted know what's going on. The converted understand. They know that this is what we have to do. We have to change our lifestyle. We have to plan our trips to go for a coffee here and stop for a bit of our work there. But that's the converted. What we need to do is talk to the guys, and we need to make sure that the message is getting through to the bulk of the population, which is exactly the people you've described. The guys looking for the cars in the 100 to 300,000 segment. They wanted to get them from A to B reliably. They don't want to have to think about, oh, if I drive a little bit faster, am I going to get to my destination? I'm going to drive a little bit slower. That's not the kind of thing that they want to worry about. They want to know that they can get to work on time, get home, go out, be safe. And I think that is purely a communication thing, which I don't know if many people have got it right at this point in time. Yeah. And it seems to me like, with respect, you're saying to us is that there's no hard and fast answer to this communication challenge, in that brands, OEMs, everyone's going to have to come at it from multiple different angles. You can't just sell an EV by pitching the performance angle or pitching this and that. You've actually got to come at it from multiple different angles. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, so Rob, I think you're looking for sort of like a step-by-step summary of how to fix this problem, yeah?
Yes, 100%. I want you to tell us how we're going to sell more EVs in South Africa, Anzet.
I would say there are three things for me to start with, right? And these are not the be-all and end-all. The one is we cannot only have messaging coming from manufacturers, right? We cannot have our consumers only getting their information on which they base the decision whether to buy an electric vehicle or not, only coming from manufacturers who stand to make the most money off of selling electric vehicles. They also need to see that reinforced from the government, from their fuel station, from their mechanic, from the service industry, from the secondhand car market, from their friends. You've got to start pulling in more people into your planning and your discussion than just manufacturers. And that's about creating more incentive and more conversations among those industries, which is something that is not happening as much as it could at the moment. And that leads me to the second thing, because the reason that's not happening is because of the lack of clarity. So if we can create more clarity about, do we have a goal? Do we know how many cars we want to have in South Africa by which point? And do we know what infrastructure needs to support that? Can we tell the service industry what percentage of their income, of their servicing is going to be electric cars by what point? And therefore they can decide how many people do I need to train in electric vehicles? And how often am I going to have to upskill them again? How quickly is EV tech going to change, right? So the first thing is not having all communication that goes to consumers come from manufacturers. And it doesn't necessarily feel like that's the case, because we're in the e-mobility bubble. We all talk to each other, the startups, the infrastructure guys, the people building the charge station, and all that. But outside of it, the person flipping through the magazine, watching TV, not necessarily the motoring channels, they're only seeing ads from manufacturers. The second one is clarity. And the third one is we need to extend our research and our efforts to understand the South African market beyond how much range do you think you need in your car, which is the standard question asked to people when they're asked, like in a public survey about electric cars, to trying to understand how people have centered vehicles in their lives, the rituals that we've built around that, and then coming together and saying, okay, how do we replace the ritual that we have to sacrifice for something else, with something else. And those decisions then need to be communicated, or maybe not decisions so much as options.
Okay, so I think, look,
Yeah.
I think it's almost an impossible question to answer from one person, but I think you've at least given us some sort of understanding of what needs to happen and what needs to change in South Africa. And Anzet, before we let you go, because we're getting to the end of our session, is same question we fired at all our speakers.
Yes.
Which one thing, and you got 60 seconds, one thing you would change to speed up the adoption of EVs in South Africa within the next 12 months? So we come back in 12 months' time, EMCSA 2022, and we say, we've achieved X. Which is the one thing that you believe is going to help us achieve X, which is we've speed up the rate of adoption of EVs in this country?
Yeah. I believe very strongly that we need to see more choice of options for South Africans. You know, when I go to a dealership now, there isn't a single electric vehicle that I can afford. And I'm not a typical South African in terms of income, right? There isn't a single electric vehicle that I would be able to afford. And that can only be done by bringing more models to the country and by addressing the issue of special tax on electric vehicles.
Okay, so you're looking for an increase in variety so everyone across the spectrum can afford to look at EVs, and obviously that means also making them more affordable by getting government to engage on those special tariffs and making EVs more affordable. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, 100%. I don't think we're going to get anywhere with the conversation until I can even begin to understand the fiscal requirement for me as a normal South African, for anybody else, to ownership of an electric vehicle, which at the moment isn't something that I can picture.
Fantastic. Well, Devon,
Yep.
I don't know if you got any other questions for Anzet?
No, I'm done. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Well, Anzet, then we are going to love and leave you on this Monday afternoon. Thank you for taking the time and helping us digest a little bit more about the communication side of how we're going to get people to take up EVs in the future. So from myself, Rob, and Devon in studio, and all of us at EMCSA, thank you very much, Anzet.
Thanks, guys, and I look forward to the rest of the program today and tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks, Anzet. Have a great afternoon. So I think Devon, we're gonna let's kind of wrap up day one.
Yeah.
All right. Some very interesting conversations.
Definitely.
A lot of insight into where we are versus where we hopefully are going to be. We started the day with Amin. She was talking from the Green Cab and about seizing the climate crisis and the rise of EVs to drive women's participation in the green economy.
Yeah.
Now, I think that was really interesting. She's been someone who's been pushing EVs for a long time in this country, really talking a lot about what we should be looking at and the opportunities to grow EVs. Some takeaways that you had from her talk.
I see a lot of positive energy, and we need to support her and companies like that. It's all about the positivity. Yes, we can do it, and that's what we need to focus on.
Yeah, 100%. So we then spoke to then we had hot seat. I mean, we had Daryl Chapman. He is the e-mobility project manager at Eskom, and he was talking to us about the potential impacts of the EV market growth on the South African economy, which I think he touched on a lot of interesting points. Not just Eskom related, but he spoke about many different aspects around the various opportunities in the South African economy, and obviously in the hot seat talking Eskom. Yeah. What did you take away from his talk? I mean, I felt it was a very frank, very honest talk.
Yes, and I think it's up to us to support Eskom in any way we can to get them the information they need. So if we've got access to maybe other surveys, better information, to say, guys, the volumes that you predict, maybe you're undercalling it.
Yep.
So therefore, from our side, can we maybe assist? Can we talk? Can we get this talk into the next level?
So what you're saying, industry needs to maybe participate a bit more with Eskom to make sure that they've got more data, more access to more data.
Yeah, in my opinion, and also to get them to realize that there's many changes that's happening worldwide. And the world is changing, and there'll be many more cars than they predict.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think that's great, that collaboration. What I found interesting from Daryl's talk, with the one thing that he said that really struck me was, Eskom wants to focus on doing what Eskom has to do, which is provide reliable power to the grid. They have no intention of putting on charging infrastructure. They don't want to diversify their business. They want to allow the private sector and the numerous people who are coming into the market to do that. They want to focus on their job, and they are looking at renewable ways of doing that, which is great for all of us.
Right.
Which really nicely moved us into our next speaker, who was Yaku Botha, the CEO and co-founder of SolarF and a director at Gridcars. And Yaku, the effect of EVs on the grid, is it a threat, or does it create opportunities or stability, as he said? Now, what was one of your? I know you were quite taken with his talk.
Yes.
What was some of the things that you took away from that chat?
I see opportunity.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the South African mindset, and we all need to push forward in that direction.
Yeah.
There's plenty of opportunities for business, for these cars, for these products. We just need to have an open mind and be positive.
Fantastic. And I think, what I really liked is that we had spoken to someone from Eskom before that, and then he came along and spoke to us about what he sees as the grid of the future.
Yeah.
Now that to me kind of said, all right, here's Eskom. We all understand the problems in Eskom, South Africa. There's no need to shy away from those problems. And then here's somebody on the private sector side who is proposing a range of solutions to that problem. And he's proposing various storage solutions. He's proposing the grid of the future, which has a various energy mix to supply what we're looking at. But also understanding that when the vast majority of EVs need to be charged is when our grid actually won't be under strain anyway.
Yes.
So do we understand that, and how that may not affect the energy matrix so much in this country that it's actually such a huge problem? And I think that gave me, me a little bit of hope. Let's say that.
Same here. And also we need to find a way to say, if I get from A to B, how do I do it? Where do I need a fast charger, slow charger?
Sure.
How do I plan my trip? How do I live my life with this new technology?
100%.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And I think, what I took away was something really interesting, is that he spoke about making sure that we all do our part in a way that we can, that's sustainable.
Yes.
And bringing about a change, and he alluded to a lifestyle change, which very nicely led on to De Villiers' talk, where De Villiers spoke about the green, I forget its exact title. It was the green lifestyle, or the green lifestyle is the distant dream. And he was talking about realistically how he lives what he believes a green lifestyle. And I think it was great because there was no illusions. It wasn't, I recycle my own waste and my house is completely off the grid and I don't do this and I don't do that, which I think a lot of people struggle to empathize with because it doesn't seem realistic. You don't, is it really possible?
Yeah.
Whereas I think De Villiers said he is 70% of his power comes from his solar installation, and 30% comes from the grid. So he's acknowledging that there still does need to be a grid portion. But if we can all reduce our grid reliance by up to 70%, then we're going to create a net gain at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I found it quite a refreshing talk, because often when people talk about the green lifestyle, my opinion is that I watch it and I learn from it, and I say, but like realistically, you're not, you're talking pie in the sky stuff.
Yeah.
You're talking stuff that maybe 5-10% of the population can do. Yeah. I think that what De Villiers was speaking about was real, the stuff that all of us could do. Yes. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yes, and it was that step-by-step mentality.
Yes.
So it's not a big change. We're not going off the grid immediately, and we have a 10-year plan, and we go step by step till we get to the point where we say we can live this green lifestyle. Yeah, that's what I took away.
And I think it was interesting because he touched on a hot topic. A lot of people say EVs aren't really that green because of the if you charge. And I think he very clearly showed it that if you are charging your EV from a gas burning or a coal burning energy source, yes, it isn't the greenest solution. It is greener than your normal ICE car. Yeah. But ultimately, we want to get to a solution where you're charging your EV from a renewable energy source.
Yes.
And that to me really drove home the message, and then how much more greener it makes your EV. And I think what he said was really interesting is that South Africa is very uniquely positioned to achieve this.
Yes. We've got the sun, and we can take full advantage of solar.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, in between all this, there was this thread that came out this morning. Rural areas, do the rural communities have the opportunity to be a part of this EV message? And throughout the whole day, we've heard that actually there's a huge opportunity from a rural economy standpoint to get the rural economy going, because many of these rural economies live in areas where there's a lot of sunlight, there's a lot of energy, so there shouldn't be barriers to entry, and there are solutions out there from various companies specifically catering towards rural markets, which in South Africa everyone talks about the big metros, and we can't have a solution if we want to move EVs forward in South Africa that deals with the metros but then disregards 80% of the country, which is rural areas.
Absolutely.
So to me that was really, really interesting, and talking about the green lifestyle. And then just before Anzet, we had the privilege of Professor Pat Wheeler. Now I know this was a highlight for you. You're a self-admitted petrol head. You're a race guy. Tell me, what did you think of Pat?
Brilliant man, brilliant mind, and the focus on racing. Racing improves the breed, and there's so much you can learn from a product development perspective. That's where it all happens. And when you got the smart minds like that with the passion, as you can see, and the focus, that's when the future is great, and the future is electric, definitely.
100%. And I think what I found interesting is, yes, as you say, racing improves the breed, and it makes it, it helps us understand where those breaking points are. And he said, motorsport gives them the chance to safely find out where the failure points are. But I think what was really interesting is his talk about how when we get to the next gen of batteries, we're going to start seeing things like limited range becoming a thing of the past. Batteries are going to become smaller and lighter, more efficient. And I think when that happens, the conversation is going to be made for us. There's not going to be but my highly efficient ICE car can still... It's going to go out the window, let's be honest.
Absolutely. It's going to be a win-win situation, and we're going to get to a stage where you've got a 600-kilometer range on your battery. There's no need to worry about infrastructure issues, etc., and that's coming soon.
Yeah, and I think what we'll see is that kind of mentality partnered with a storage solutions of energy across the country, which is sustainably sourced, and a vast availability of infrastructure. You can charge your EV wherever you want, whenever you want, and you can make the shift that your lifestyle doesn't have to fundamentally change.
Yes.
And I think that really nicely wrapped into Anzet's talk now, where she was talking about people have the culture and the rituals that we have, especially in South Africa, associated with vehicles.
Yes.
And we need to make sure that EVs fit into that understanding. We can't just, one day expect everything to change.
Yes.
And I found that she was speaking a lot about change and how do we communicate that change, and how do we make sure that everyone has access to that information.
Yes.
And to me, it seems exciting. I'm very, very excited to hear what the future has. And someone like Anzet talking about the communication, and I think she's spot on, is we need to have more options in the country so that people can afford to make the change, who want to make the change. And I think pretty much every speaker touched on the big elephant in the room, is to try and get government on board to bring those tariffs down so we can have more options in the country.
Yes, there has to be an incentive. We've not had that incentive up to now. And when that happens, that's when we're going to see the light switch flip.
Sure.
That's what it's about.
100%. Yeah. So let's talk about the light switch, and we're going to go forward into day 2. So day 2, I'm going to give everyone a quick summary. I'm hoping we're going to see everyone again. We've had some really good viewership today, a lot of good questions. I'm so sorry if we haven't answered everyone's questions. I know some of the questions have been answered by other viewers, so that's been great to see, a lot of interaction. Tomorrow morning, we start 9 o'clock, bright and early. Myself and Devon will welcome you. Then at 9:15, we have Chris Selwood AM. He is the director of the Bridgestone World Solar Challenge. And Chris is going to be talking to us about the future of mobility. So now day 2, we're going to look in the crystal ball. What does Chris Selwood see? He's been involved in electric mobility in its most sharpest form. What does he see coming? What does he see the future being? Then we got a very, very exciting talk by Nhlanhla Mazibuko, who is the founder of Mazibuko Motor Company. And what I can tell you, and I can't tell you everything that's going to happen, but believe you me, you do not want to miss this one. This is something that is going to be important. He is going to be announcing something that's really, really exciting, and I think it's exceptional. If you have one talk tomorrow, and you set your diary, and you're watching us from wherever you are in the world, 10 o'clock Central African time, tune in. You do not want to miss that talk. Okay. That is going to be something exciting. After our tea break, we come back and we have Tian and Johannes from TUT, and they're having a panel discussion around prototype solar electric vehicles in a South African context. Now, this is exciting.
That's exciting.
Because what if I don't have to charge my electric vehicle?
Yes.
What if driving my car through the Karoo to Cape Town charges it? Suddenly, the game has changed. Suddenly we start talking about cars like Lightyear 1 out of Netherlands. We start seeing the opportunity that maybe I only have to charge my car. And you were saying every 600 k's. What happens if I only have to change my car every 1,000 kilometers? Wow. Because the sun provides my charge. I think that's going to be something that I'm really excited to see. We follow that up with Claysha Johnson, who's the Electromobility and On-Demand Mobility Solutions Manager for BMW. And she's going to be talking again about the future is electric. So here we have BMW, one of the main brands in South Africa that is pushing the electric mobility message. And we have their manager for electromobility, Claysha Johnson. She's going to be with us, and she's going to be talking about the future is electric. That, to me, if you are interested in e-mobility, or you're just interested in mobility in general, again, it's a key session, 5 to 12 tomorrow. You don't want to miss that one. That is going to be an amazing, amazing session. And then we move on, 1:45. I know your personal favorite, or sorry, I shouldn't say. Gaylor is Montmass and Claire, and he's going to be going through exploring policy options to support the EV value development chain in South Africa. Now, this touches on everything. Yeah. Because everyone has said today, what's the one thing they would change? Policy. Yes. So I'm hoping Gail is going to come with some answers to all these questions about how do we change policy. We then go into Robert Kuchan, who is the Senior Professional in Sustainability and Reliance Australian Road Research Board. And he's talking about the environmental impact of low and zero emission vehicles. So what environmental impact do these vehicles have? Now, everyone says they're great and they're low carbon emissions. What other environmental impact do they bring? And then one of our keynote finish for tomorrow. Your good friend.
Can't wait for him.
Can't wait for him. Do you want to take us through what Frederick John?
Well, smart cities, all these electric cars need to fit into an ecosystem.
100%.
And he's going to take us through his smart plans, his thoughts for the future, and it's going to be the perfect way to end the conference. Can't wait for that chat.
So Frederick John, closing off day 2 of EMCSA, is talking about smart cities. Yeah. What do our cities of the future look like? EVs on the road, smart charging, wireless charging, all these great concepts that we've heard spoken about today, and I think anyone in the space knows about. Hopefully he will be wrapping it all up, bringing it together, and saying to us, this is what the smart city of the future looks like.
100%.
Well, I'm going to look forward to sharing tomorrow with you, Divan.
Absolutely.
And you know, these are some heavy hitting speakers. So to everyone who's been with us today, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you haven't registered for the conference and you want to register so you can engage with us, please get in touch with us. Alternatively, we'll be on Facebook tomorrow. You can comment throughout the whole day. We've got some great international speakers. You do not want to miss day 2. So from myself, Rob,
and from Devon, see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. We wish you a great rest of the 1st of March. And from all of us here in the EMCSA studio, have a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.